The dust swirled in lazy spirals around the adobe walls of the small homestead. As Maria hung the last of the wet clothes on the line, the New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly, and she wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her own baby, little Eduardo, slept peacefully in his wooden cradle inside the cool interior of their modest home. At 22, Maria had already learned the rhythms of frontier life, the endless cycle of washing, cooking, tending to animals, and caring for her infant son while her husband Jose worked the fields. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. Living on the edge of Apache territory meant that every unexpected visitor could bring either trade or trouble. She quickly gathered the remaining wet clothes and hurried inside, her heart pounding as she peered through the small window. A lone rider approached slowly, and as he drew nearer, she could see that he was Apache, a young warrior, perhaps no more than 18, with traditional dress and paint marking his face. But something was wrong with the picture. The warrior held something in his arms, something small and precious. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she realized what it was. The young man carried a baby, an infant who couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The child's cries were weak and desperate, the sound of a hungry baby who had been crying for too long. The warrior's horse moved slowly, almost stumbling, and she could see the exhaustion in both rider and mount. When the Apache warrior reached her door, he dismounted carefully, never loosening his protective hold on the infant. Maria had heard enough Apache words from the traders, who occasionally passed through, to understand when he spoke. His voice was hoarse and desperate as he held out the baby toward her, repeating the same word over and over: milk, milk. Without hesitation, Maria opened her door. The language barrier seemed insignificant in the face of a starving infant. The warrior's eyes were hollow with grief and exhaustion, and she could see dried tears on his painted cheeks. He spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing to the baby, to the horizon, to the sky. Though she couldn't understand his words, the story was written in his posture, his expression, his gentle handling of the tiny child. Maria reached out her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, the warrior placed the baby in them. The infant was a beautiful child with dark hair and skin that spoke of mixed heritage, perhaps Apache and Mexican, or Apache and Anglo. The baby's lips were dry and cracked, and his little body felt frighteningly light. Without a word, Maria turned and walked inside, the Apache warrior following hesitantly behind. She settled into her rocking chair, the same chair where she nursed Eduardo every few hours. The warrior stood by the door, ready to flee but unable to leave while his precious charge remained in need. Maria unbuttoned her dress and brought the starving infant to her breast. The baby latched on immediately with the desperate hunger of near starvation, and Maria felt her milk let down in response to his need. As the baby nursed, the tension in the small room began to ease. The warrior's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he spoke softly in Apache, what sounded like words of gratitude and explanation. Maria wished she could understand more, but the universal language of caring for children needed no translation. She hummed softly as the baby fed, the same lullaby she sang to Eduardo. When the infant had drunk his fill and fallen into an exhausted sleep, Maria looked up at the young warrior. In broken Spanish mixed with Apache words and gestures, he began to tell his story. His name was Nalnish, which meant he works. The baby was his son, born to his wife just 3 weeks earlier. A cavalry patrol had attacked their small group while they traveled to join other family members. His wife had been killed in the fighting, along with several others. He had managed to escape with his son, but the baby needed milk, and Nalnish had no way to provide it. Maria listened with growing compassion as the young father's story unfolded. He had been traveling for 2 days, stopping at every homestead and settlement, begging for milk for his child. Most had turned him away, some out of fear, others out of prejudice. She was the first to open her door, the first to see past his warrior's pain to the desperate father beneath, as if summoned by some invisible signal. Eduardo woke from his nap and began to cry. Maria shifted the Apache baby to one arm and lifted her own son with the other. For a moment, she stood there holding both infants, one light-skinned with brown hair, the other darker with black hair, both completely dependent on her for sustenance. The sight seemed to move Nalnish deeply, and he spoke quietly in Apache, over the following hours. An unusual routine developed. Maria would nurse both babies, sometimes together, sometimes taking turns. Nalnish helped however he could, fetching water, tending the fire, even attempting to help with Eduardo when the toddler fussed. Despite the language barrier, they found ways to communicate about the children's needs. When Jose returned from the fields that evening, he stopped short at the sight that greeted him. His wife sat in her rocking chair with both babies in her arms while a young Apache warrior knelt by the fire, gently stirring a pot of beans. The scene was so unexpected, so contrary to everything he had been taught about Apache raiders, that he could only stare. Maria quickly explained the situation, and though Jose's initial reaction was concern for their safety, the sight of the sleeping infants softened his heart. Nalnish posed no threat, he was simply a father trying to save his child's life. That night, they offered him food and a place to rest, though he chose to sleep outside under the stars with his horse nearby. The next morning brought a difficult decision. The baby was stronger after a full night of regular feeding, but he would need continued nourishment to survive. Nalnish could not provide what his son needed, and Maria could not abandon either child. Through gestures and broken words, they discussed possibilities. Nalnish could take his son and continue searching for nursing mothers, but the risk was enormous. The baby might not survive another journey, and not everyone would be as welcoming as Maria had been. It was Jose who suggested the solution that surprised them all. Why couldn't Nalnish stay, at least for a while, until the baby was older and could take other foods? They had enough land, enough work for another pair of hands. It would be unusual, certainly, but these were unusual circumstances. Nalnish was torn between gratitude and pride. To accept would mean dependence on the very people his tribe sometimes raided. But as he looked at his thriving son in Maria's arms, the choice became clear. His son's life mattered more than tribal politics or personal pride. Days turned into weeks, and an extraordinary family began to take shape. Nalnish proved to be a skilled hunter and tracker, bringing in game. That improved their diet considerably. He learned Spanish quickly, eager to communicate better with the people who had saved his son. Maria learned Apache words, particularly those related to child care and daily life. The babies, meanwhile, thrived under her care, growing strong and healthy. The arrangement wasn't without its challenges. Neighbors were suspicious and sometimes hostile when they discovered an Apache living with the Mexican family. There were tense moments when other Apache groups passed through the area, and Nalnish had to explain his unusual situation. But gradually, the community began to accept the strange family, especially as they saw how well the arrangement worked for everyone involved. As the months passed, something beautiful began to happen. Nalnish's son, whom they had named Miguel after Maria's father, began to see Maria as his mother in every way that mattered. She was the one who fed him, comforted him, sang to him, and watched over him as he took his first steps. Meanwhile, Eduardo gained not just a brother but a father figure in Nalnish, who taught him to track animals and understand the natural world. Maria found herself loving Miguel as fiercely as she loved Eduardo. The circumstances of his arrival became less important than the daily reality of caring for him. When he smiled at her, when he reached for her comfort, when he babbled his first words in a mixture of Spanish and Apache, her heart expanded to encompass this child who had come to her through tragedy but brought such joy. The story of how an Apache warrior came begging for milk and found a mother for his son became legend in their small community. It challenged assumptions about enemies and strangers, about the bonds that truly make a family. Maria had given the gift of life to a starving child, but in return, she had received something equally precious: a son to love, and a broader understanding of what it meant to be human in a harsh and often unforgiving world. Years later, when both boys were grown men, they would tell their own children about the day when desperate need broke down barriers and created something beautiful from something tragic. They would speak of Maria not as a stepmother or foster mother, but simply as their mother, the woman who opened her door, her heart, and her arms when a warrior came begging for milk and found the family he never knew he needed.